The Brothers Karamazov, Book 7, A Judicial Error, Subsection 11. There was no money. There was no robbery. There was one point that even astonished everyone in the defense counsel's speech, and that was the complete denial of the existence of the fateful 3,000 rubles, and therefore also of the possibility that it had been stolen. Gentlemen of the jury, the counsel began, any fresh and unprejudiced person coming to the case before you will be struck by a certain characteristic peculiarity, namely, the accusation of robbery and at the same time the complete practical impossibility of indicating just what exactly was stolen. We are told that money was stolen and precisely the sum of 3,000, but whether it actually existed, no one knows. Think about it. In the first place, how did we first come to learn of this 3,000, and who saw it? The only person who saw it and indicated that it was put away in an envelope with an inscription was that lackey Smerdyakov, and he communicated this information to the defendant and his brother Ivan Fyodorovich before the catastrophe took place. Miss Svetlova was also made aware of it. None of these three persons, however, actually saw the money, and again the only person who did was Smerdyakov. But here the question asks itself: if it is true that it existed and that Smerdyakov saw it, then when was the last time he saw it? And what if his baron had taken the money from under his bed and put it back in the box without telling him? Please observe that according to the testimony of Smerdyakov, the money was under the bedding, under the mattress. The defendant would have had to pull it out from under the mattress, and yet nonetheless, the bedding was not rumpled in any way, and this had been painstakingly recorded in the protocol. How could the defendant have quite failed to rumple the bedding in any way, in addition, with his hands that were still covered in blood to smear the most fresh and fine bed linen, and with which the bed had been on the occasion specially made up? But we shall be told. What of the envelope upon the floor? It is indeed this envelope that merits a few words. I was today somewhat astonished. The highly talented prosecutor, in approaching the subject of this envelope, suddenly himself, do you hear, gentlemen, himself, in his speech, declared concerning it, precisely in the passage where he indicates the preposterous nature of the assumption that Smerdyakov was the murderer. Had that envelope not been there, had it not remained upon the floor as evidence, and had the robber carried it off with him, then no one in all the world would ever have discovered that there was an envelope and money in it, and that, therefore, the money had been stolen by the defendant. And so, even by admission of the prosecutor himself, it is solely and exclusively this torn scrap of paper with the inscription on it that has served to accuse the defendant of robbery. For otherwise, we are told, no one would have discovered that there had been a robbery, or even, perhaps, that there had been any money. But this is the mere fact that this scrap was lying on the floor really a proof that it contained the money, and that the money had been stolen? Well, we are answered. After all, it was sent in the envelope by Smerdyakov. But when? When was the last time he saw it? That is the question I ask. I talked to Smerdyakov, and he told me he had seen it 2 days before the catastrophe. Why is it, then, that I cannot envisage, for example, the circumstance that the old man Fyodor Pavlovitch, having locked himself up at home in the impatient and hysterical expectation of his beloved, might suddenly have taken it into his head, out of idleness, to take out the envelope and unseal it? What, he might think, if she does not believe a mere envelope? If I show her 30 rainbow bills in a single wad, that will have a more powerful effect. Her mouth will water. And he tears open the envelope, takes out the money, and throws the wrapping on the floor with the masterful hand of a seigneur, of course, without fear of leaving any evidence. I ask you, gentlemen of the jury, could anything be more within the bounds of possibility than such an assumption and such a factum? Why should it be impossible? But you see, even if something of the kind may have taken place, then the accusation of robbery is of itself destroyed. There was no money, and therefore there was no robbery either. If the envelope lay upon the floor as evidence that it had contained the money, then why may I not assert that the reverse to be true, namely that the envelope lay upon the floor for the very reason that there was no longer in it the money that had been taken from it beforehand by the seigneur himself? Yes, but what in that case become of the money, if it was taken from the envelope by Fyodor Pavlovitch himself? It was not found in his house during the search. For one thing, a part of the money was found in a box in the house, and for another, he might he not, have taken out the money that morning, or even the day before, in order to dispose it of in some other way, by paying it out, sending it away, in a word, to alter his idea, his plan of action, as at its very root, and in doing so, not at all consider it necessary to inform Smerdyakov of it beforehand. And you see, if there exists even the mere possibility of making such an assumption, then how can one so emphatically and so firmly raise against the defendant the accusation of having committed the murder for the purpose of robbery, and that a robbery did indeed take place? Whoa, he's really good. He's picking out all the logical fallacies or potential logical fallacies with the prosecutor's speech. Damn. All right, back to the book. Why, in such manner do we enter the domain of the roman. After all, if we assert that such and such an object has been stolen, then we need to be able to identify that object, or at least prove beyond dispute that it existed. But no one even set eyes on it. In St. Petersburg recently, a certain young man, a boy practically, 18 years old, a small-time hawker from a tray, entered a money-changer's shop in broad daylight with an axe, and with extraordinary typical boldness murdered the shop owner, and carried off with him 1,500 rubles in cash. Some 5 hours later he was arrested. Upon his person, apart from 15 rubles, 1,500 rubles, it said earlier. Okay, back to the top of page 932. Upon his person, apart from 15 rubles, which he had already managed to spend, the whole 1,500 was found. Not only that, but the shop owner's assistant, who had returned to the shop after the murder, informed the police not only of the sum that had been stolen, but of what precise denominations it had consisted, that is to say, how many rainbow credit bills there had been, how many blue, how many red, how many gold coins, and of what type, and then on the arrested murderer, precisely the same banknotes and coins were found. Whoa, that's a very good point. In addition to all this, there followed a complete and open confession by the murderer that he had committed the murder, and had carried off that same money. Now that, gentlemen of the jury, is what I call evidence. For now I know, I see, I touch the money, and cannot say that it does not or did not exist. Is it thus in the present instance? And yet, after all, it is a matter of life and death, of a man's fate. Yes, I shall be told, but after all, that same night he had been on a spree, squandering money. 1,500 rubles was found in his person. Whence did he obtain it? But you see, it is precisely because only 1,500 rubles were discovered, while the other half could on no account be tracked down or discovered. It is precisely this that proves that the money must have come from a different source altogether, and had never been in any envelope. By a computation of time, and a most strict one, it is established and proven by the preliminary investigation that the defendant, having run out of the kitchen where the serving maids and having gone to the home of the civil servant Perkotin, did not call in at his lodgings, and indeed made no other calls, but was subsequently in the constant company of others, and so could not have divided off a half of the 3,000 and hidden it somewhere in the town. It was precisely this condition that formed the grounds for the prosecutor's assumption that the money was hidden in some cleft or crevice in the village of Mokroy. Why might it not indeed be in the dungeons of the castle of Ulovol, gentlemen? Oh, is it not a fantastic, a Romanesque assumption? And observe, if you will, that if this one assumption is proven groundless, that is to say, that the money is hidden in Mokroy, then the entire accusation of robbery is blown into the air. For where, then, whither has that 1,500 gone? By what miracle could it have vanished? if it is proven that the defendant made no call to any house. And with such romans, are we prepared to bring ruin upon a human life? I shall be told. But even so, he was unable to explain he obtained the 1500 where but even so, he was unable to explain where he obtained the 1500 that was found upon his person, and besides, everyone knew that until that night he had no money. But who knew this? No, the defendant has given clear and firm testimony as to where he obtained the money from, and if you will, gentlemen, if you will, never could there be nor can there be a testimony more plausible than this, nor, in addition, one more compatible with the character and soul of the defendant. The prosecution took a liking to its own Roman, a man of feeble will, having decided to accept the 3,000 so disgracingly offered to him by his betrothed, could not, it is said, have divided off a half and sewn it into an incense bag. On the contrary, had he done so, every 2 days, he would have unpicked it and peeled off 100, and in such a manner expended the whole within a single month. You will recall that all this was given exposition in a tone that would suffer no retort. Well, but what if the affair proceeded not at all this way, and what if you have created a roman, and in it a different personage? There is the rub. You have created a different person. It will perhaps be retorted. There are witnesses who say that in the village of Mokroy he squandered the entire 3,000 he had taken from Miss Verkovzeva a month before the catastrophe, all at once, like a single kopeck, and therefore he could not have divided off a half. But who are these witnesses? The degree to which these witnesses may be trusted has already been made manifest at this trial. Moreover, the slice of pie always looks bigger in another's hand. And finally, none of the witnesses who say they saw the money counted it themselves, but merely judged it by eye. Why, the witness Maximov testified that the defendant had 20,000 in his hand. You see, gentlemen of the jury, a psychology is a thing with two ends. Then permit me to supply the other end, and let us see if the result be otherwise. A month before the catastrophe, the defendant was entrusted by Miss Verkovzeva with 3,000 rubles for dispatch by post. But there is a question. Is it the case that it was entrusted to him with such disgrace and degradation as was proclaimed earlier? In her first statement on this subject, Miss Katerina put it another way altogether, while in her second statement we heard only cries of animosity, revenge, cries of a hatred long concealed. But even the mere fact that in her first statement the witness gave evidence that was incorrect gives us the right to conclude that her second statement, too, may have been incorrect. The prosecutor does not wish, does not dare, those words are his, to touch the roman. Well, so let it be, I shall not touch it either, but shall merely permit myself the observation that if a pure and highly moral person, such as the highly respected Miss Verkovzeva, indisputably is, if such a person, I say, permit herself, all at once, during the trial, to alter her first statement with the unequivocal aim of bringing ruin upon the defendant, then it is also clear that the statement of hers was not made without bias, in cool composure. Is it really proposed to deny us the right to conclude that a woman, in taking her revenge, may exaggerate many things? Exaggerate, indeed, that very shame and disgrace with which the money was offered by her hand. For on the contrary, it was offered in such a way as to make it possible for it to be accepted, particularly by a man as thoughtless as our defendant. Before anything else, he had that day in view the speedy receipt of his father of that 3,000 that was owing to him in settlement. That was thoughtless, but by very reason of his thoughtlessness was he also firmly convinced that the latter would pay him the money, that he would receive it, and therefore be able at any time to dispatch by post the money that had been entrusted to him by Miss Verkovzeva, and square the debt. On no account, however, will the prosecutor allow that he might that same day, the day of the accusation, have divided off a half of the money he had received and sewn it into an incense bag. Not thus, he says, is this man's character. He was not capable of such emotions. But after all, you yourself have cried that Karamazov is broad. You yourself have cried of the two extreme abysses that Karamazov may contemplate. Karamazov is just such a nature with two sides, two abysses, that even in the grip of the most unrestrained need for a spree, he is able to stop if something makes an impression on him from the other side. And you see, that other side, it is love. That very same new love that ignited within him that day like gunpowder. And for that love he needs money, and more needfully, oh, far more needfully, than even a spree with that same beloved. If she were to say to him, I am yours, I do not want Fyodor Pavlovitch, and he were to seize her and take her away, then he would need to have the wherewithal to do so. That, after all, would be more important than any spree. Did Karamazov not grasp that? Why, that was the very thing that had made him ill, that concern. So what is so improbable about his having divided off that money and hidden it away for any eventuality? Now, however, time is slipping away, and Fyodor Pavlovitch has not paid the 3,000 to the defendant. On the contrary, there is a rumor that he has allotted it to the specific purpose of enticing away his beloved. If Fyodor Pavlovitch does not let me have the money, he thinks, I shall end up a thief before Katerina Ivanovna. And now there is born within him the thought that this same 1,500, which he continues to carry around with him in the incense bag, he will take place before Miss Verkodzeva, and say to her, I am a scoundrel, but not a thief. And so now, therefore, he has a double reason for guarding that 1,500 like the apple of his eye, and will on no account unpick the bag and peel off 100 rubles at a time. Why will you not deny the defendant a sense of honor? Nay, a sense of honor does not indeed exist within him, even though it be an irregular one, even though it be very frequently a mistaken one. But it does exists to the point of passion, and he has proved this. But now, however, the affair grows more complex. The torments of jealousy attain their highest degree, and still the same two earlier questions appear ever more tormentingly within the inflamed brain of the defendant. Shall I return to the money to Katerina Ivanovna? With what means, then, will I take Grushenka away? If he had been behaving like a madman, so, getting drunk and raging about the ends all that month, then it was perhaps for the very reason that he himself was sick at heart, and it was more than he could endure. These two questions became in the end so aggravating that they finally drove him to despair. He made the effort of sending his younger brother to his father, in order to ask him for the 3,000 one last time, but, not waiting for an answer, he himself burst in and ended by brutally beating the old man in front of witnesses. After that, consequently, there is no one from whom he may obtain money. His brutally beaten father will not give it. On the evening of the same day, he beats himself upon the breast, upon that very upper part of his breast, where the incense bag is, and swears to his brother that he has the means not to be a scoundrel, but that he will nonetheless remain a scoundrel, for he can foresee that he will not take advantage of the means, has insufficient inward strength, insufficient character. Why? Why does the prosecution not believe the testimony of Alexei Karamazov, given so purely, so sincerely, so without preparation, so plausibly? Why, on the contrary, does it try to compel me to believe the existence of the money in some cleft or crevice in the dungeon of Udolpho's castle? On the same evening, after his conversation with his brother, the defendant writes this fateful letter, and it is this letter that is the most cardinal, the most colossal fact that convicts the defendant of robbery. I will ask for it from all men, and if they will not give it to me, I will kill my father and take the money that is in the envelope with the pink ribbon from under his mattress, if only Ivan has gone away. A complete program of the murder, it is said, and who could it be, if not him? It was performed the way it was written, the prosecution keeps exclaiming. But in the first place, it is a drunken letter, written in terrible anger. In the second, again, concerning the envelope he writes from, what he has been told by Smerdyakov, for he himself has not sent the envelope. And in the third, the letter was written, and that there is no denying, but was what was written performed? How may that be proven? Did the defendant obtain the envelope under the pillow? Did he find the money? Did it exist even? For after all, it was not for money that the defendant had come running. Remember, remember, remember! He had come running headlong not in order to commit a robbery, but merely to learn where she was, this woman who had destroyed him with misery. Not according to a program, therefore, not according to what he had written, did he come running. Not, that is, in order to commit a premeditated robbery, but came running suddenly, in a rabid frenzy of jealous rage. Yes, it will be said, but even so, having run in and committed murder, he took the money, too. But there at last we have it. Did he or did he not commit the murder? The accusation of robbery I reject with simple indignation. A man cannot be accused of robbery if it is impossible to identify with precision what was stolen, and that is an axiom. But did he commit the murder? Committed without any robbery? Is even that proven? Is not that too roman?